Got a pretty good treat for you guys today. We're going to have the first segment of Rachel Maddow's show today and the first segment of Lawrence O'Donnell's show. As you know, they both normally have really good first segments. Very informational, very educational, and very informative. So this is what we're going to have today, and this is what we're going to be looking at. We're going to start off with Rachel's show. Let's get right to it.
You at home very much for joining us this hour. I'll tell you, as I ran into the studio tonight, this is my last night of being here every night for the first 100 days. As I ran into the studio tonight, I face planted into the back of one of the major lights that illuminates me in the studio. So if at some point in this final broadcast of my 100 days, it suddenly gets really, really bright in here, it's not that I'm about to be struck by a meteor. It's that the cover that we just stuck back on the light has fallen off because I broke it with my face. So there you go. Just running through the tape here. All right, we got a lot to get to tonight. Let's jump right in. First of all, I got an update for you on the story that we led with last night from Oklahoma City. If you saw the show last night, you know what I'm talking about. It was a very memorable story from the NBC affiliate K4 in Oklahoma City. And we had just a huge reaction to our coverage of that story. It's the story of an Oklahoma City mom and her daughters who were forced outside in the rain in their underwear at gunpoint by U.S. federal agents who broke down the door, tore their home apart, took all their phones and electronics and thousands of dollars in cash from this family. These are U.S. citizens. They were not the target of any law enforcement investigation. Agents reportedly told the family they were from the FBI, the U.S. Marshal Service, and ICE, but the Marshal Service and the FBI, after this raid, now say that they didn't have any of their agents there. It wasn't them. As I said, we got this story from the excellent NBC affiliate in Oklahoma City, K4. We have now also obtained from them these pieces of paper that the agents left at the house after they broke in. They left the warrant, which identified this address that they were going to, even though they were seeking people at this house who no longer lived there. They also left these two pieces of paper, right? So they broke in, terrorized this mom and her daughters, forced them outside in the rain in their underwear, tore apart their home, took their phones and their money, but they left them this. It's a 2-page inventory of what the agents say they took from their home. You can see there where it says U.S. currency. They don't say how much or anything, but that's the money that they took from this family. Now, what's interesting here is that at the top of this form, there's a space to write in which agency these federal agents were from. And what they wrote in there is HSI. So again, the FBI and the Marshal Service say that whatever those agents told that family when they broke in, the Marshal Service and the FBI were not represented there. Well, what's HSI? The agency that filled out this inventory of all the stuff that was taken from this family? HSI is Homeland Security Investigations, which is a very low profile but very large group of armed agents within the Department of Homeland Security. It is a large agency. They have thousands of agents. They are basically a huge federal armed force with no public profile. The Trump administration appears to be using them for all kinds of things. They don't seem to have a very clear remit. And like I said, the public mostly has never heard of them. Have you ever heard of this agency before, HSI? Do you, for example, know who's in charge of HSI? Who's the head of it? Do you know who you'd call if agents from HSI broke into your house, even though they concede they were looking for somebody else and not you, and you're not the target of any investigation? Well, we found out who, technically, at least, is in charge of HSI, this acting executive associate director of Homeland Security Investigations. We have been trying assiduously to get in touch with him to try to get a comment on this story and on the reported behavior of these HSI agents in Oklahoma City. Specifically, we're trying to find out what exactly this Oklahoma City mom is supposed to do to get her money back and all of her family's stuff back, let alone to get her house repaired, after these federal agents broke through the doors and tore apart everything inside and terrorized this family, even though, again, they were not the targets of any investigation. They are U.S. citizens. HSI did not return any of our calls. Homeland Security, more broadly, is not addressing those questions from us either. We will keep trying. Also, you might remember this case of Mohsen Maddow, which we've covered a few times on the show in the last few weeks. He's a university student who is a legal permanent resident. He has a green card. He turned up for his citizenship interview in Vermont, and masked federal agents swooped in on his citizenship interview and arrested him and took him away. We now know that the agents who arrested him at that citizenship interview were also HSI, were also this same armed division within Homeland Security. That detail, that it was HSI agents, was confirmed in a court document today, in a court ruling today, in which Mohsen Maddow was set free. This young man lives in Vermont, even though he is a legal resident of the United States and has not been charged with any crime. He was worried that Trump was going to try to arrest him because of his participation in protests over the war in Gaza. His friends and his community in Vermont made a plan in advance to prepare for just such an emergency in case it came to pass. They'd set up a group text in advance so they could respond rapidly if Trump's agents came to arrest Mr. Maddow. When it in fact happened at his citizenship interview, his friends, his supporters in Vermont, they made sure he was not alone. They filmed his arrest. They notified the media. They notified his lawyers, who were able to act very, very quickly. And only because they were able to act so quickly were they able to get a judge to block the Trump administration from flying Mohsen Maddow across the country to one of these black site immigration prisons in Louisiana. That judge's quick order kept Mr. Maddow in Vermont. Since then, Vermont U.S. Senator Peter Welch not only spoke out on his behalf, as did the other members of Vermont's congressional delegation, but Senator Welch also went to Colchester, Vermont, and visited him in the prison where he was being held. Vermonters turned up again and again and again, protesting on Mr. Maddow's behalf at the state capitol in Montpelier and at the prison where he was being held. And today they got him out. And that support for him among his community in Vermont was referenced again and again in the ruling today, setting him free. Let me just read you a little bit from that ruling. It's pretty remarkable. Quote, through counsel, Mr. Maddow filed a motion for release on April 22nd. That motion is supported by over 125 letters of support from professors, neighbors, fellow students, and others who know him well. All attest to his mild and peaceful nature, his deep intelligence, and his commitment to principles of nonviolence and political activism. Now, because the Trump administration accused Mohsen Maddow of anti-Semitism for his criticism of the war in Gaza, the judge goes on in his ruling to note this. He says, quote, a striking number of these letters come from Jewish colleagues and professors involved in the study of the history and culture of Israel and Judaism. The judge's ruling continues, quote, non-citizen residents like Mr. Maddow enjoy First Amendment rights in this country to the same extent as U.S. citizens. The Supreme Court has never held that the First Amendment fails to protect non-citizens' political speech to the same extent it protects citizens' political speech. That includes the right to be free from retaliation for the exercise of First Amendment rights. The judge says, quote, people who know Mr. Maddow describe him as a peaceful figure who seeks consensus in a highly charged political environment. But even if he were a firebrand, his conduct is protected by the First Amendment. The judge says, quote, this court also considers the extraordinary setting of this case and others like it. Legal residents not charged with crimes or misconduct are being arrested and threatened with deportation for stating their views on the political issues of the day. The judge says, quote, our nation has seen times like this before, especially during the Red Scare and the Palmer raids of 1919 and 1920, which led to the deportation of hundreds of people suspected of anarchist or communist views. Similar themes were sounded during the McCarthy period in the 1950s, when thousands of non-citizens were targeted for deportation due to their political views. The judge in his ruling then cites a famous Supreme Court dissent that called out, quote, the menace to free institutions inherent in procedures of this pattern. The judge today says, quote, "The wheel of history has come around again. But as before, these times of excess will pass." Quote, "Mr. Maddow has strong ties to the Vermont community where he owns a home. He is a full-time student who has been accepted into a graduate program. He has deep connections to professors, his faith community, and, it would appear, a great many friends. Mr. Maddowi's release is in the public interest. His continued detention would likely have a chilling effect on protected speech, which is squarely against the public interest. Continuing to detain him would not benefit the public in any way, as he appears to be neither a flight risk nor a danger to the community. Mr. Maddowi's release will benefit his community, which appears to deeply cherish and value him. This court, therefore, declines to stay its order pending appeal and instead requires Mr. Maddowi's immediate release. Whereupon his friends and neighbors who had packed the courtroom and held silent throughout the judge's ruling from the bench, they reportedly could not contain themselves anymore. And according to the New York Times reporter who was in the room, they burst into applause. And then Mohsen Maddow was set free and walked out of the courthouse. So it is not an idle question, right? It is not a hypothetical question to ask, what are the plans in your town for when Trump's agents come and arrest somebody from your church or your school or your neighborhood, right? In the Mohsen Maddow case, we've got this sort of case study. They would not be setting him free if Trump was able to spirit him away to Louisiana. They weren't able to spirit him away to Louisiana because they acted fast. And they were only able to act fast because they had planned in advance what they would do if, in fact, Trump's masked agents did come in and arrest this young man. In advance, they made a text chain. They made a network. They called lawyers. They made a plan. And now he's free. And this isn't the only time it has worked. You might remember at the beginning of this month, we saw it in Sackett's Harbor. Sackett's Harbor, New York. Do you remember this? This small town where a mom and her 3 kids were taken by Trump's immigration agents. And the school district where the kids were all in school and the churches in that town and the whole town of Sackett's Harbor, New York, they all came out to demand that those kids and their mom be released. This is a town where there aren't even 1,400 people. The population of this town is like 1,360 people. More than 1,000 people came out in that town and marched and protested to get that mom and her kids home. And they got them home. ICE released them. And people are doing things like this everywhere. Back in Vermont, where Mohsen Maddow was just freed, these nuns from the Sisters of Mercy joining a protest to try to return 8 farm workers who were all arrested and taken away on a local dairy farm. You might have heard this weekend in the news about the big raid where they arrested more than 100 people at a nightclub in Colorado Springs. You heard about this weekend? Well, this was yesterday. People turning out at the El Paso County Sheriff's Office in Colorado Springs saying, let these people go. Yesterday, there was an ICE raid of some kind in Evansville, Illinois, where they arrested people. Well, people in Evansville were immediately out in the streets yesterday protesting. Local news in Evansville last night and today is full of news about the outrage in that community and the protests in response. Trump's so-called border czar, this guy Tom Homan, he paid a visit to give a speech in Rochester, New York yesterday. Tom Homan in Rochester, New York was greeted by not 1, not 2, but 3 different protests by angry Rochester residents. One in front of the public safety building in Rochester, one outside the club where Homan was speaking, and one on a highway overpass on his route into the city. Due process is overdue, Tom. Today in Washington, D.C., there was some peaceful civil disobedience, people blocking traffic this morning. They had a huge copy of the Constitution that they unfurled as a big banner. Their signs said things like, which will you choose, courage or compliance? That was the theme of this action today, courage or compliance. Torch fascism with the Statue of Liberty and her torch. They had a big globe with a sign in front of it, respect existence or expect resistance. This morning's action that we just showed you there, that comes on the heels of the big rally for fired federal workers that we saw at Union Station in Washington, D.C. yesterday. Last night, when Trump showed up in Warren, Michigan for his big, weird 100 days speech, he was greeted by a whole lot of people who wanted to give him a little piece of their mind. 100 days of BS. What's there to celebrate next to vets versus fascism? Make America grift-free again. You're fired, with a pretty good portrait of Trump there. Grifter in chief. Also this sign, you voted for democracy, not dictatorship. This one made me laugh. Put in by Putin. Fair enough. This was a fine shout out to the Queen, Sharon Jones. 100 days, 100 nights to know a man's heart. You know that song? Or in this case, 100 days, 100 nights to know a man has no heart. A lot of 100 days signs in Warren, Michigan, greeting the president last night. 100 days of incompetence, 100 days of cruelty, 100 days of chaos and loss, 100 days of destruction, 100 days of greed and evil, which spells out Doge, 100 days of Edvard Munch's The Scream, 100 days of lies, insults, cruelty, incompetence, corruption, betrayal. Celebrating 100 days of ineptitude and corruption. Yeah, Warren, Michigan says, "Hi, Mr. President. I dissent." That's what greeted him when he arrived in Warren, Michigan last night. We're expecting a lot of protests tomorrow, May 1st, also known as May Day. We expect hundreds of protests against Trump tomorrow all over the country. May Day, you may know, is also Law Day. And all over the country tomorrow, there are going to be stand up for the rule of law events. People saying, protect our courts, protect our rights, including one of these events we believe is going to happen on the steps of the United States Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. According to lawdayofaction.org, one of the things you're going to see at many of these stand up for the rule of law events tomorrow is lawyers publicly reaffirming the oath that lawyers take when they become a member of the bar. People essentially re-swearing their oath to support the Constitution of the United States. This first 100 days of this presidency have been, there's a lot of ways you could call it. A lot of people have been coming up with good science, put their own spin on it. I would say it's been a historic debacle. But I would also say that one of the most important things to know about that is that the country is very clearly wide awake to it. Right? This is not a secret. Quote, Trump appears to be less popular at the 100-day mark than any other president since the inception of approval polling, says the Financial Times. Headline, Trump's approval at 100 days lower than any president in at least 7 decades. Headline, poll finds more Americans give Trump an F than any other grade for his first 100 days. They asked Americans to grade him. More Americans gave him an F than any other grade. Headline, new polls reveal Americans, including Republicans, losing faith in Trump. And you pile on top of that the economic judgment that is pouring in now in reaction to Trump's bizarre economic policy decisions. Donald Trump's first 100 days mark worst for U.S. stock market since Gerald Ford. U.S. stocks have underperformed the rest of the world this year by the widest margin in more than 3 decades, as Trump's erratic policymaking sparks an investor exodus from American assets. Quote, U.S. economy shrinks 0.3% in the first quarter as Trump trade wars disrupt businesses. U.S. economy shrank in early 2025 as Trump tariffs sapped growth. I mean, it's bad. I would say it's an historic debacle. But, you know, it's not over yet. We're only 100 days in. How's he handling this bad news? How are his political skills at this moment for handling a political moment like this? Well, here's another headline for you from today. Headline, Trump on tariffs says, quote, maybe the children will have 2 dolls instead of 30. He really did say this on camera at the White House. I'll spare you the tape. I'll tell you, though, his exact quote was, well, maybe the children will have 2 dolls instead of 30 dolls, you know? And maybe the 2 dolls will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally. So that's a little snapshot of the president's political skills right now. That's his political instincts, his ability to know just the right thing to say in a difficult moment. That's how sharp he is at this point in his life. He is handling the disastrous American public opinion polling and his performance thus far, and the self-imposed total self-immolation of the U.S. economy by telling America's children, you know what? You have too many toys anyway. Suck it up, kids. Also, buy my crypto coin. You can maybe tie it all up in a bow with this new polling from the Public Religion Research Institute. Axios got the first look at this polling, and I think their headline on it sums it up well. Quote, most Americans see Trump as a, quote, dangerous dictator. And that's exactly what that poll found. I mean, the exact phrase that was put to people in this large, well-respected poll was, President Trump is a dangerous dictator whose power should be limited before he destroys American democracy. Do you agree? The answer was yes, by 8 points. Yes, a majority of Americans agree with that. 52% of the country agrees with that. Break it down along racial lines, 67% of Black Americans agree that Donald Trump is a dangerous dictator whose power should be limited before he destroys American democracy. 67% of Black Americans. Latino Americans, 63%. Asian American or Pacific Islander, 58%. It's only white people among whom a majority do not agree with that statement, but even among white people, it's still 45%. A dangerous dictator whose power should be limited before he destroys American democracy. Speaking of Trump's power being limited, court losses keep piling up for him. Trump is now being forced by the courts to reinstate the more than 1,400 people he tried to fire from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Trump has also just been ordered to pay Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty the $12 million in grant funding they were owed in April, according to their congressional appropriation, that Trump nevertheless was refusing to pay out. And that ruling is important in its own terms. But in that ruling, you should know, there was a sort of an important sort of statement that went along with it. Language in the ruling from the judge in this case, who is a very conservative 81-year-old Ronald Reagan appointed judge in Washington. He closed his ruling in this case by noting that the constitutional paradigm that mandates that Trump can't block this funding that was approved by Congress, that constitutional paradigm, in the judge's words, is, quote, a framework that has propelled the United States to heights of greatness, liberty, and prosperity unparalleled in the history of the world for nearly 250 years. If our nation is to thrive for another 250 years, each co-equal branch of government must be willing to courageously exert the authority entrusted to it by our founders. Judge Royce Lamberth, deeply, deeply conservative veteran judge in the Federal District Court yesterday in Washington. What a time, right? I mean, this is the end of the 100 days. This is the start of the second 100 days. And here's Donald Trump, less popular than any president has been at this point in his presidency since the dawn of modern polling. He's like blaming Joe Biden for everything he's doing. He's complaining that the polls must be fake, all of them. He's telling America's kids that, you know what, they've had it too good and that's about to change. While meanwhile, the courts are finding their voice and the people never lost theirs in the first place. Second 100 days. The country seems like we're ready. Tonight, we're just getting started. Lots to come tonight. Stay with us.
Very good first segment from Rachel Maddow's show. Isn't that Oklahoma raid very sad about our authorities in this country raided that family house with that woman and her daughters, just disrespected her across the board? This is not what America is all about. How do they get away with something of that magnitude? And there's still protests going strong across this country. And I think that in the near future, we're going to see some even more strong protests. Elon Musk seems to think that he's out of the water, sitting around laughing and giggling at that meeting they had today. But people are not forgetting your Nazi salute. You're not forgetting what you've done to us through Doge, firing all of those people, taking away necessary programs and all. We haven't forgotten. And here he is blaming Biden for his bad retracting economy. No, Trump, this is yours. 100% yours. So stop trying to blame Biden. Biden had a good economy. He handed you a very good economy. Everybody knows this. The whole world knows this. You're making a fool of yourself on the world stage. Stop trying to blame Biden for all of your mistakes. You're going to bankrupt this country just like you did all of your businesses over the years. We know who you are, Donald Trump. You're not fooling anyone. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and listen to what Mr. O'Donnell is going to bring to us tonight. We know it's going to be informative. We know it's going to be educational. So let's go ahead on and see what Mr. O'Donnell has to give us tonight.
Wonder, what would Donald Trump's character name be if he were a character in The Sopranos? And so I got permission. I got permission from the great David Chase, who created The Sopranos, to offer my guess, what I would pitch in The Sopranos writer's room. In fact, just to be sure, I texted David, I don't know, an hour and a half ago, and I said, on my show tonight, I'm going to take the liberty of suggesting what Trump's character name would be if he were a Sopranos character. You'll have a better idea, I'm sure. And I'm sure David will have a better idea. He immediately texts me back and says, nah, go for it. I can't wait. So David Chase has authorized me to take my wild guess about what Donald Trump's Sopranos character's name would be if he were a character in The Sopranos.
Okay, every single word and premise of that is freaking fantastic. I got to tell you, though, I sort of feel like Donald Trump already is a character in The Sopranos, and obviously he's Livia. He's Livia.
Yeah,
he's the whiny mom.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yes. Who eventually gets, I've always thought of him as Livia Soprano with too long a tie on. But, you know, you inventing a new character for him, I will stick around to see that.
You're way ahead of me on this, and I think you're exactly right. I would join, I would quickly join Team Rachel in the writer's room as soon as you made that pitch. I'd be dropping my idea and going, yeah, that's it. Let's go with that.
Once you hear it, he kind of looks like her too. Like from the side,
yeah,
there's like a Livia thing
there
going on. I know.
It's all there.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rachel. See you Monday.
Thank you.
See you Monday.
Yeah, see you Monday. See you Monday.
Good. Well, we now have a new possibility for the now years-old guessing game of what Donald Trump's name would be if he were a character on HBO's Emmy-winning gangster series, The Sopranos. If I were in The Sopranos writing room today, my new pitch for the Donald Trump character name would be Donnie Two Dolls. And I'm sure the Emmy-winning creator of The Sopranos, David Chase, would have a better idea. I'm sure he would. But for me today, he's Donnie Two Dolls. And here's why. As we reported on this program last night, companies in the United States who do most of their business during the Christmas season, including companies that sell toys, are facing such a bleak Christmas because of the massive Trump tariffs that some of those companies are already consulting bankruptcy lawyers. Today, that story about the Trump Scrooge effect on Christmas spread to the point where Donald Trump knew he had to respond to it. The New York Times reported factories in China produce nearly 80% of all toys and 90% of Christmas goods sold in America. Alarm in the industry is palpable, with the companies predicting product shortages and higher prices. Some business owners citing how crucial holiday sales are to their bottom lines are consulting bankruptcy lawyers. And now with 238 shopping days until Christmas, Donald Trump today decided that we just have way too many dolls under those Christmas trees in America, and it is time to cut back.
Much of it we don't need. You know, somebody said, oh, the shelves are going to be open. Well, maybe the children will have 2 dolls instead of 30 dolls, you know, and maybe the 2 dolls will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally.
So Donnie Two Dolls thinks this country's kids are wildly oversupplied with dolls. During World War II, when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was leading the world in the war against Nazism, while President Roosevelt was leading this country out of the Great Depression at the same time, there were restrictions on what you could buy in this country. There were government-imposed price controls and government-controlled purchasing limits on things like tires and gasoline. But in the worst of World War II, at the absolute height of our mobilization effort, the President of the United States never said how many dolls could be under a Christmas tree. Only Donnie Two Dolls could think like that. Why didn't he mention that in the campaign? Why didn't Donald Trump say in the campaign, there's not going to be as many toys under the Christmas tree when I'm president, especially dolls? And why didn't he say Christmas was going to be more expensive? Why did he never say that his tariffs were going to mean that on Christmas you were going to have to pay, as he put it, a couple of bucks more for those two dolls? And why is he saying that now? He's saying it now because the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the stock market and the Democratic members of Congress and the Senate, like our first guest tonight, Senator Elizabeth Warren, are hammering Donald Trump with the truth about his tariffs every single day. Today, Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren posted on social media, quote, "Trump on day one. Your costs will be lower immediately. Trump on day 100. Your kids will now have fewer toys, and also you're going to pay higher prices." For those of you out there who have ever owned a Barbie, I know most of you owned more than one if your parents could afford it. I know many of you owned at least a dozen, but Donnie Two Dolls says those days are over. No more in America. Two is enough. And there appears to be, from the historical record, some consistency about Donald Trump's ice-cold feelings about dolls.
I remember one of my earlier Christmas gifts was a Barbie, and I was devastated because my brothers had gotten Legos and erector sets.
Right.
So to me, this, is traumatic.
Pretty easy life, if that's what you call traumatic. There are children starving to death in Africa tonight because of her father. Her father stopped the life-saving food deliveries that the United States was making to save lives in the famine in South Sudan. That's what USAID was doing there, saving lives with food, the most elementary way you can save a baby's life, by feeding a starving baby. And her father stopped that. In that TV appearance, Ivanka Trump told Conan O'Brien that she grabbed her little brother's Legos and built a model of Trump Tower with them that her father was very proud of. And then, in a book she wrote a couple of years later, Ivanka Trump said that her brothers confronted her about that Lego story, claiming that it just wasn't true. And so it seems tension about what's under the Christmas tree and what happens with it can last an awful long time in that family. And it seems Donald Trump might be the only rich guy in America who bought his daughter exactly one Barbie. I'm sure she was in her Barbie phase for more than just one Christmas, so let's just assume that Donnie Two Dolls ended up getting her at least two Barbies during that period. What you see in Donald Trump's deranged riffing today about two dolls is that all of the chaos landing on us from the Trump tariffs was never anticipated by Donald Trump because he does not understand how tariffs work. I thought Donald Trump was lying every day of the presidential campaign when he said China would pay his tariffs. I thought Donald Trump was at least smart enough to know that tariffs imposed by the United States are paid only in the United States when those goods from foreign countries arrive in the United States. The tariff is paid right on the dock by the companies like Best Buy or General Motors that import those products. The Wall Street Journal wisely, in its editorials, calls tariffs border taxes, because that's exactly what they are. They are sales taxes imposed on Americans at the border, at the port of entry into this country where those goods arrive. The biggest port of entry for products from China is the port of Los Angeles. Shipping is dropping dramatically in the port of Los Angeles, and so longshoremen and truck drivers, who are the very first American workers to touch those goods as they arrive in the United States, then move through the United States, are facing the possibility of massive job losses thanks to Donald Trump's tariffs. And they might only be able to afford $2 under the Christmas tree this year, thanks to Donald Trump. There's no way to survive this. That's what Rick Woldenberg said today on MSNBC in an interview with Chris Jensen, where he explained what Donald Trump's tariffs are doing to his company and the 500 people who now have jobs in that company, but whose jobs are now threatened by Donald Trump.
Our company makes educational products. We sell into schools and we sell into homes, and there's a lot of people who depend on what we do. So obviously frustrating that he basically says what happens to us and the 500 people that work in our company is no concern of his. I can tell you that the stock market is going down, in my opinion, because only one thing has changed, and that's these tariffs. The economy was booming when he came in, and he hit us with tariffs. We are responding to the incentives that he's given us. His first tariff at 10% was a big problem for us, and we immediately began canceling events and cutting our spending. It's now gone up into the stratosphere. It's 2.5 times what he said on the campaign trail would be the highest tariff he would put out. There's no way to survive this. We're in the most competitive market in the world. And I'd like to say one other thing. He said, we have to take our medicine. We're not taking medicine here. We're taking poison. This is going to kill these businesses. I'm one of 300,000 businesses in many industries that are similarly situated and similarly affected. We're not a rounding error. You can talk to any of our employees and ask them.
We're not taking medicine here. We're taking poison. This is going to kill businesses. Voters know now that that is true. This is poison. It's going to kill businesses, kill jobs. And so tonight, Donald Trump has lost the support of the voters who made him president, not the hardcore 25 or 30% who think Donald Trump is some sort of religious figure who they are devoted to. There's probably nothing that Donald Trump could ever do to lose them, no matter what's under their Christmas tree. But weeks ago, Donald Trump lost that 3 or 4% of voters who made him president in the final days of voting and making their decision to vote. And now he is the most unpopular president on the 100th day of his presidency since the invention of polling, and possibly the most concentrated negative opinions and feelings about Donald Trump are held by business leaders, including Republican business leaders. A new poll shows that 84% of business leaders say they are very or somewhat concerned about the impact of the current political and legal climate on their businesses. In that poll, 81% of Republican business leaders said they are very or somewhat concerned about the impact of the current political and legal climate on their businesses. When Donald Trump decided to get into the business of selling his strangely enormous neckties in bright, garish colors, he had those neckties made in China. And the Trump golf carts, where Donald Trump appears to spend as much time as he does sitting in the Oval Office, those golf carts are some of the most international products in the world. CNBC reports while both Club Car and Easy Go assemble their golf carts in the United States, they source their components from China, Taiwan, India, Malaysia, Turkey, and Europe, among other countries. No matter how long Donald Trump clings to his tariff madness that is separating him from voters and making congressional Republicans vulnerable in the next election, and no matter how long Donald Trump plays golf, he will never in his lifetime ride in a golf cart made with all American parts. That will not happen in Donald Trump's lifetime. The Wall Street Journal editorial board was very disappointed that Jeff Bezos assured Donald Trump in a panicked phone call made by Donald Trump that Amazon will never reveal to customers how much the Trump tariffs are adding to the prices they will pay and already are paying on Amazon. The Wall Street Journal editorial board said, quote, "The public could have used Amazon's price transparency. Tariffs are taxes, and it's helpful to know how policy choices affect final prices. Some shoppers might say the additional cost is worth it to support Mr. Trump's policy, but there's no denying that they're paying, and everyone is better off knowing how much. Like taxes, tariffs often add a precise dollar figure to a sticker price. Voters who pay little attention to the macroeconomy will notice a direct markup on items they buy." Senator Elizabeth Warren has some questions for Jeff Bezos and what she called his subservience to Donald Trump after Donald Trump made that phone call to Jeff Bezos to complain about just the possibility of Amazon actually revealing on its website what the Trump tariffs are actually doing to prices. Senator Warren wrote to Jeff Bezos saying, "Yesterday's activity appears to be another example of big tech working together with President Trump to seek special favors or support his policies in what can appear to be a quid pro quo. My concerns about the potential for tariff-related corruption to benefit big tech firms who provided millions in donations to the Trump inaugural committee and other insiders as the president rolls out, reverses and modifies his policies, have become more acute with each passing day. And yesterday's report indicated that you have now personally become involved in key decisions about what consumers can learn about the true cost of tariffs." Tonight on the Senate voted 49-49 on a resolution to stop Donald Trump's tariffs that he imposed after declaring a national emergency. Two senators who missed the vote would have voted in favor of the resolution. The Republicans who voted for the resolution include Senator Rand Paul, Susan Collins, and Lisa Murkowski. Before the vote in the Senate tonight, Senator Elizabeth Warren said this.
President Trump took a strong American economy and broke it in less than 100 days. Right now, Republican senators are at a crossroads. Will they vote to stop Trump's chaotic tariffs and save our economy, or will they continue bending the knee to Donald Trump? Americans are worried they won't be able to survive a cratering economy. And just today, Americans woke up to the news that Donald Trump single-handedly shrunk our economy in 3 months and raised the cost of their groceries. The warning lights are all flashing red. We've seen this before, but this time our economy is teetering on the edge, not because of a mortgage meltdown or a one-in-a-century virus, but because of one man alone: the President of the United States. If Republicans care about the American people, they will vote yes on our resolution today and turn off the fake emergency that Donald Trump is using to impose his on-again, off-again, red light, green light tariffs, the tariffs that are pushing our economy off a cliff.
Leading off our discussion tonight is Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. She is the ranking member of the Senate Banking Committee and a member of the Senate Finance Committee. Senator Warren, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I want to begin on that point you made about one person has caused that. And if you look back throughout the economic history of this country, we've had plenty of downturns, we've had depressions, we've had recessions, never caused by an individual, by one person making decisions that caused a slide like we are seeing now that is, according to many projections, on its way to recession and real job losses.
Yeah, you've got it exactly right. And the contrast here is breathtaking. So for over a year, Donald Trump ran on he would lower costs on day one. How many times he said on day one? Those were his words. He gets elected. In his first interview, he said that was one of the main reasons he won. And now he's been there 100 days. He has taken this strong and growing economy and he has broken it. And he has already driven up prices for consumers. We also saw the data come out today that just the grocery basket has become more expensive in the 100 days that Donald Trump has been president of the United States. And then when you weave in with that, this isn't just like a little blip or one kind of problem we're dealing with. It is the 1-2 punch of the chaos that's been created by these tariffs and the opportunity for corruption, for Donald Trump to sell favors by giving exceptions for some people, who knows, raising tariffs for others. In other words, chaos and corruption together, that's what truly breaks the back of an economy.
Yeah, the corruption point that you raise with Jeff Bezos is so important. And tariffs, it seems to me, especially the way they're being executed now, literally by one person, have introduced a corruption opportunity that is the greatest corruption opportunity in the history of this country. I mean, you're on the Banking Committee and the Senate Finance Committee, and you know that the most expensive lobbyists in the world surround those committees all day, you know, trying to get their provisions into banking legislation, tax legislation, and so forth. It's so much easier now. You go to one place and you talk to one person, and you talk to him on the phone maybe when your business is thinking about doing something that might bother him, and by actually describing what tariffs are doing to prices. Yep. What do you get back when you do a favor for Donald Trump like that?
You know, maybe this is what Elon Musk means by efficiency, one-stop shopping for corruption. And remember here that this conversation today that took place with Jeff Bezos is in the shadow of a conversation that took place just a couple of weeks ago with Tim Cook, another billionaire who donated $1 million to Donald Trump's inauguration. Remember how Donald Trump said, I'm putting these tariffs in place and there will be no exceptions. And how do I know Donald Trump really meant that? Because he put it all in caps in the tweet. No exceptions. You remember that? And then Tim Cook gives Donald Trump a call, and Donald Trump comes right out and says, I talked to Tim Cook, and we're going to have a special deal for his company. Apple will get an exception to all of those China tariffs. So the opportunity here through the tariffs for dealing back and forth in corruption is truly staggering. Understand again, one person is in charge. This is like the king who just waves his magic scepter, and all of a sudden that one over there has a lot more money and is doing great, and all those people over there are doing worse. And it's all a question of who helped the king in whatever way the king wanted to be helped most. And at the end of the day, you and I can sit here and point this out, but understand it is truly American families that will pay the price for this. The recession that the economists are talking about, yeah, it's a lot of numbers, and GDP shrunk today, but families live this one day at a time. This is about higher prices for groceries, higher prices for toys for the kids. It's also about the risks that you're going to lose your job. It's about not being able to make it to the end of the month. And American families, millions of them, are already in much more economically precarious shape than they were a year ago at this time. Consumer debt is up. It's at higher levels, $4 trillion higher than it was in 2019. Consumer defaults on credit cards are at the levels we saw in 2008 in the middle of the crash. Same kind of thing for car loan defaults. And families are telling us themselves that they are worried. They are worried about prices going up. They're worried about losing their jobs. They're worried about holding it all together financially. That is what 100 days of Donald Trump has brought to the living rooms of every American family.
Senator Elizabeth Warren, an honor to have you here with us on the 100th day. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
There's our conclusion of two good segments. One by the Rachel Maddow show, the other by the Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Lawrence O'Donnell at the very beginning with the two baby dolls president. Remember that you're only going to be able to afford one or two baby dolls for your kid for Christmas this year because we're about 7 months out and there's nothing coming across the ocean from China and other countries. So we can start paying for layawaying and planning for our kids' Christmas. Donald Trump said that out of his mouth. Instead of you having 10 baby dolls or 11 baby dolls or maybe buying one for your neighbor's kid who can't afford it, you're only going to be able to have one or two. And then we have Jeff Bezos of Amazon folding to Trump and his administration's pressure. He was going to do the right thing and have his company put the tariff tax right there with the state taxes and other fees so you'll know what you're paying and why you're paying a higher price. We all know it's about the tariffs, but they wanted to visualize it for you. But after Trump's tantrum and the pressure from his administration, Jeff Bezos reversed that. He folded, which is a sad thing. Now we have where Elizabeth Warren pointed out that the corporations are benefiting from everything. Every time you look around, there's another huge corporation calling Trump or having a meeting with him like Apple did to have the tariffs retracted from their business. But the consumers are suffering. We still have to pay that tax. Families are suffering. Prices are on their way up. We had a first quarter retracted economy under Donald Trump, and he's lying about it, trying to blame Joe Biden. Joe Biden, we all know, handed Donald Trump a very good economy. In 100 days is in the dumps. Donald Trump is doing what Donald Trump does, failing this country like he failed all of his businesses. Okay, guys, let me know what you think down in the comment section about what you heard from Lawrence and Rachel tonight. I enjoyed it. I learned something. Let me know in the comments what you learned after you subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks a lot. We'll see you on the next one. I ask you guys to like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thank you.